Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for joining us on such a wonderful sunny evening. We're thrilled that so many people have signed up for this event, so much so we had to reopen and extend the booking, which is in no small way a testament to how highly regarded tonight's guest is, Kate Wakeling. We're going to be celebrating A Dinosaur at the bus stop, and I'm going to invite Janetta Otterbarry from Otterbarry Books to start this evening.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very exciting launch. So excited to be launching Kate Wakeling's debut Key Stage 1 collection. I've admired Kate as a poet since seeing her perform at the Clipper in 2017, I think it was, which she won with Moon Juice. And I saw her up on stage, an electric performance. And I thought, gosh, this young woman is really amazing. I wish I was publishing her. And now I am. So it's a dream come true. And the book is everything that we hoped for. And you're going to hear lots of it, which is fantastic. We paired Kate with Scottish illustrator Eilidh Muldoon, very talented young illustrator, and you'll be seeing some of her work this evening as well. I think she really caught the mood of the poems and got the level right. So I think it's pretty much a perfect Key Stage 1 collection, actually. So thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And over to you, Nikki. Thank you very much for your usual brilliant hosting.
Thank you, Janetta. And thank you so much for asking me to host the event, because listening to you talk about how highly you regard Kate, I have to say the same is true for me as well. And when you asked if I would do this event, I was absolutely thrilled. Actually, we've got an action-packed event for you this evening. Kate's going to be reading lots of poems from the book, and we will be inviting you, should you wish to participate at various points throughout the event. So find where the chat is, because that's where we'll be asking you to add your contributions if you wish to. There's no pressure whatsoever. Don't suddenly disappear because you think you're going to be showcased. It's really just a bit of fun. And we will also be opening the Q&A quite early in the event, and I hope to pull your questions in as we go along. So, Kate, before we, first of all, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's such a good-looking book as well, isn't it? The front cover's absolutely
very nice as well. It's got a lovely mixture of, I don't know any of the official words for it, but a lovely mixture of textures and different levels of shininess.
This is younger than your other collections. Tell us a little bit about how this particular collection came to be.
Yeah, so it felt quite a departure because the books that I've published with the Emma Press are, I guess, more kind of Key Stage 2 age, so from age 7, 8 upwards. And I think when I was first talking to Janetta, we sort of felt like it would be nice to make a distinction between working with two different publishers. And actually, it just felt like a really interesting challenge. And it's been very fun for me. My eldest son has been just sort of at the perfect age while I've been writing these poems. He's sort of been from age 5 to 7 sort of across the growth of the book. So it's been a really, as a parent, I guess, I feel like I've had some quite interesting insight into sort of how a brain might work at that sort of age, and been really fun to, it's been a slightly different way of writing and a different approach to themes and to language, but I've really enjoyed it.
We're going to pick some of that up as we go through and you read the poems. But can I just ask you, did you kind of read them to him or speak them, if you like, to him and adjust things according to his response?
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, and I could tell the ones that it was always very helpful. It was very clear the ones that worked, and if there was a draft that wasn't quite headed off in the right way, it's always a very clear reaction from really young children, isn't it? And actually, a lot of the ideas. I mean, yes, he doesn't mind, but I mean, things have really been sort of borrowed from conversations and things like that. There's a poem about an ant's view of the world that feels like that was, for a few months, that was kind of the main thing we seemed to talk about. So it was a really nice experience to work on.
Now, we've grouped the poems that you're going to read this evening around certain themes, and the first one is humour. And I thought it would be good to go straight in, as we have got a lot to get through in our hour, and we really want to hear these poems. So let's go straight into our first section.
Brill. So I'll read a poem, shall I, to start?
Mm.
So this poem is called Mr. Long Gets Everything Wrong, and I'll read the poem first. Mr. Long gets everything wrong. Mr. Long gets everything wrong. He wears socks on his head. He eats jelly in bed and spreads the silvery slime of a snail on his bread. Yes, Mr. Long gets everything wrong. He cleans his teeth with a spoon, thinks he was born on the moon, and when everyone's sleeping, sings very loud tunes. Oh, Mr. Long gets everything wrong. He plays the drums with his nose, eats noodles with his toes, and sunbathes in his underpants all day when it snows. But perhaps Mr. Long doesn't get everything wrong, for when all's said and done, I think he might have a lot more fun than someone who gets everything right.
Well, do you know what's really interesting to me is we've said that this is a collection for young children, but poetry, as I often say, and I'm sure you say the same, has no age really. And that poem about Mr. Long, it seems to me, has as much to say to adults who are so concerned with doing the right thing.
Yes, I guess so. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also quite fun. I think children take so much from sort of exploring the idea of adults getting things wrong, and but yes, it did. I felt I started the poem very much just about this idea of kind of topsy turviness, which I was struck seemed something that was very appealing to children of this age. Um, and then I was like, I don't just want to end it there. Yes, it felt nice too. I feel like the spirit of anti-perfectionism has been something very important for me to try and learn. For lots of people, not to feel too worried about mistakes, and that being a really important part of learning. So, yes, I was keen to slip that in at the end.
And yet there's a sort of paradox there, because a poet has to be absolutely right. You know, every word has to be the right word in the right place and the structure. So I don't know, there's a sort of ambiguity about it all as well.
Yes, well, I always often say I feel like for me, writing poems is a really enjoyable mix of something quite anarchic, and you can't necessarily pin down what a poem's about. You know, writing for adults particularly, but at the same time, yes, you need to apply enormous precision in saying something that you're not entirely sure how else to articulate it apart from the poem. So yeah, maybe it's quite encapsulated in Mr. Long.
Let's hear your second poem from this section.
I feel I should apologise to Janetta, who I'm not sure is well. I should say this is a poem about farts, and I feel like it's somewhat unrepresentative of the things I normally write about, and that I'm in a way. There's a temptation sometimes in children's poetry for this, scatological stuff that hasn't always been my bag. Although great that other people write super poems about pants, but I anyway thought I'd have a go at a sort of fart poem, but I suppose it is a slightly different one. It's called "This is a Sensible Fart Poem," and it actually has a footnote, which is this is a very sensible poem. It is important that anyone reading or listening to this poem stays very serious and very sensible from beginning to end. Thank you. This is a sensible fart poem because there's nothing funny about farts. You wouldn't be the sort of person to find a fart funny, would you? Of course not. And we can all agree that what isn't funny about farts is the noise they make. The way they slide out with a little hiss, or thunder around the room with a squelch. There is nothing funny about this. And then there's the smell of farts, the eggy stink of a really large fart. Also not funny. Why would a gust of gas squirting out of a bottom make anyone smile? Because the funny things in this life are jokes and clowns and people falling over on banana skins. Not farts. Not a guff or a trump or a pump or a bottom burp or a little Tommy squeaker. Nope. There's nothing funny about farts, is there?
Yes, there is. You didn't mention the carpet slipper.
Oh, I did. No, it's interesting. Another someone excellent working with children emailed with another excellent. I was thinking, yes, there needs to be a gathering of idioms around the country. It'd be like when people talk about what do you call a bread roll.
Well, maybe there's an invitation, our first invitation to our audience. If they wish in the chat, please don't be inhibited. Write your own version of what you call one of these things that is known as a fart. So I have to say, I've not seen many poems about farts in adult collections. So I wanted to talk a little bit about children's responses to poems and the sorts of things they find funny and what you found through your many visits to schools and festivals and so on. What do children, respond to? And I don't think you can just plaster the word around and they will, well, maybe they will actually. But yes, tell us a little bit about humour and children as you've observed it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose I feel like humour, when it's a little bit about a sort of transgression, is, I think, for the kind of older end of Key Stage 2, really fun. So for year 2 groups, I quite often ask some volunteers with some explanation of what they might do to come up and to give them the instruction that it's really important that they can they stay as serious as possible. And so and then I think just this sort of feeling of watching people, if they then do find the poem funny, which luckily does seem to happen, that sort of feeling of, yes, of watching people trying to maintain a very certain decorum and that kind of breaking down. And I suppose that, for me, I found the idea of farts quite funny, because I don't think I do actually find farts that funny. My husband finds them really hilarious, and so in a way, I suppose I feel like he probably finds this poem funnier than most children. But yes, I guess, and I suppose the Mr. Long poem, it's also about grown-ups, kind of a grown-up, a Mr., someone with a title even, not knowing how to behave, and that seeming and doing these absurd things. And I think, for whatever reason, I think that's, I suppose, as children are learning their place in the world and how the world is put together and what patterns of behaviour are expected of them. It must be very relieving at that point where you're constantly being told you have to line up in this way and not talk in this way and sit over there. That maybe it's just very refreshing to see a grown up or hear about a grown up doing something completely upside down or very silly, like reading a poem, like hearing a teacher read a poem about a fart in a very sensible way.
And of course, you're inviting them to break the rule in that poem.
Yeah. Yes.
The way it's written.
Yes, it's not too hostile. But yes, I was relieved. My son's teacher apparently read this poem out to them, and it's been regularly requested since. So it's nice to know, because I didn't know. Yes, is it just about, I have a particular way that I would be keen to deliver it in a very sort of deadpan way, but I hope the footnote is an invitation to anyone reading out the poem to yes, to try and seem rather serious about something obviously absurd.
I predict lots of teachers looking very serious as they read that poem tomorrow morning to their classes. With older children, though, your poems tend to be more linguistic. There's a lot more wordplay.
Yeah. Although I have the kind of, I'd say the funniest the funniest poem I've written for older children is probably a poem called Weird Cake, which is about some kind of lots of strange things being put into a cake. I suppose I think I quite enjoy slightly deadpan humour, so things that seem quite fantastical or flamboyantly strange, but happening within quite a kind of what seems like quite a fixed structure of how the language might work or how the kind of tone of the poem, but then in the middle of it there's something slightly kind of explosive happening, and children seem to find that enjoyable. I think it's probably, yes, I guess that's a reflection of a lot of our lives, are that we're yes, often having to behave in certain sensible ways while inside have something a bit more explosive happening.
I want to talk a little bit about empathy, and we know that the Empathy Lab are launching their Read for Empathy list, and you have a collection on that list. And empathy is something that is it's something that you've given due consideration to in this collection as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, a huge amount. I think I think I was really struck that it's at this exact age. I think so. It's kind of from 4 to 5 that that children begin to get this idea of a theory of mind, that the idea that other people have brains and thoughts and emotions, and of course it's only the sort of nascent sense of that in other people. But it felt like, in a way, I feel like it's one of the most amazing things about poems. They can offer us these kind of snapshots into other ways of thinking, and so quite a few of the poems I wanted to kind of explore that. And I think in a way I was trying to think, it's a sort of slightly different slant, and I was also just trying to think really empathetically about children and about their own interests as well, because I think I've been so struck by the sorts of things that children are really into when they're younger, that their interests are often very kind of precise and small. And there's a poem called My Treasures, which is just about a sort of mini collection of things that a child might have put together, like an acorn cup and a special kind of badge and a paper clip and a leaf that has a lovely smell and things like that. And there's another poem about stick collection as well, which I think a lot of parents will recognise the strange accumulation of sticks that often happen outside front doors. So trying to, I suppose, affirm children in their own kind of interests and the things that excite them, and feeling like that that feels like an important thing to do in a poem as well. Might have veered off topic, sorry.
No, not at all. But when you were doing that, and consequently, so you kind of observe this in young children, then you write a poem about it. But you've obviously been a young child yourself too.
Yeah,
Did it put you back in touch with the kinds of things that you did at that age?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really interesting because I think I instinctively, when I think back to being a child, I think I probably in the first instance when I was writing for children would go a bit older, hence those two collections for older children. And so it was a slightly different jump. I don't think I think my sort of child self is about 8 or 9 somehow within me. So it's been an interesting jump, and in some not necessarily more deliberate, but kind of I think it just was very lucky that I happened to have a child of that age, and so felt very, very connected to some of those ways of thinking, of just being around that age group of groups of friends and things like that. And absolutely, yes, actually I think the poem My Treasures, about those items, they were, yes, I sort of suddenly had sudden memories of particular kinds of objects that really just felt pleasing. And it's quite hard to articulate why, but they're just different for each person, and but they feel like they're true treasures, even though they're treasures only in a personal sense.
For me, it was sweet wrappers and making them into, folding them into different things, making little animals and cups, and I was obsessed by doing that. So again, to our audience, please do feel free to comment on any of this or add your own thoughts as we're chatting. After this next section, I'm going to invite Kate to read some poems from this section, but I will then open the Q&A, so be thinking about that as well. Anyway, children's interests and empathy. I know you've got a few more poems to share with us.
Yeah, so I thought I'd start this section with a poem called Me and the Dark and the Wardrobe Door. And it's a poem about, I think, quite a particular thing that seems to be quite common among children, and can happen to us even as adults, when we turn the light off in our room, particularly at bedtime, and that the objects in a room can sort of assume kind of strange forms. But I thought it's interesting because talking about it with children, I think there's an awareness that it's not actually there's anything really monstrous there. It's just the sort of possibility of it. And I think poems are really good at that sort of grey area between, there's two different states between finding something frightening, but also knowing rationally that it is just the way that the door is hanging, something like that. So this is called Me in the Dark and the Wardrobe Door. When I'm in bed and out goes the light, well, sometimes the things in my room seem to change at night. I look, and I'm sure the wardrobe door is a creature with claws. And the bookcase grows a spooky face, and that pile of clothes becomes a crocodile with a horrible smile. So I shout out, and in you come, and on goes the light, and whoosh, everything's all right. And I know it's just my brain playing tricks. There are no monsters or meanies here, no witches on broomsticks. But when we switch off the light, and once more it's me and the dark and the wardrobe door, this time I keep my eyes shut tight. And I thought I'd read another poem, which I suppose very directly links to kind of this idea of theory of mind, or of kind of empathetic connection to other people. Quite a simple idea, but it's called 11 People on the Bus. And I suppose, yeah, must be a fascinating moment. I can't remember the exact sensation, but suddenly being aware that the world is full of all these other sets of thoughts and ideas and emotions. So 11 people on the bus. On the bus, the people sit. Some pick their nose, some chat, some knit. One is dreaming of the sea. 2 is wondering what's for tea. 3 is scared they'll miss their stop. 4 just wants a lollipop. 5 sings 6 a lullaby. 7 swats a buzzy fly. 8 talks loudly on the phone. 9 now wishes they'd walked home. 10 is tired, with far to go. 11 has an itchy toe. 11 people on their way through 11 sorts of day. And then I have one more poem I would read in this set, which is called My Home. I'll just read the poem. My Home. My home has an interesting secret. My home knows all sorts about me. It knows when I laugh, and it knows when I cry, and it knows what I like for my tea. My home knows my favourite story. My home knows the toy I like best. It knows when I pick at my toenails, and it knows if I put on my vest. My home knows what I find most funny. It knows when I'm cross or fed up. It knows when I'm lost in a daydream, and it knows why I don't like that cup. Yes, my home has an interesting secret, and if there was some sort of a test that asked what I'm like, what I do, who I am, well, my home is who knows me the best. Oh, Nikki, I think you might be muted, or it might just be me.
No, it is me. Thank you. I was just going to say the word home is so different to the word house, isn't it?
Yes, and actually,
A house wouldn't know you, but a home does.
Yeah. Well, I also felt I think I had a sort of first line that had a house, and then I thought, well, of course, we don't all live in houses. We all live in all sorts of different places, and actually, a home can be something that can be very. You can try and make somewhere feel like home in a day. So I thought I wanted the poem to feel like it was open to people in lots of different circumstances.
Yeah.
But yes, with a word is also has a yes, it is also different. It's something very different from the bricks and mortar.
Absolutely. We're going to hear from Ellie a little later on, but I wanted to say how fabulous her illustrations are. And I know that as you read that poem about people on the bus, they're going to be children working out which person is number 1, number 2, and so on.
Yes, it's a nice conundrum, that one, because they're not all completely obvious. You have to work your way around the bus. And of course, I hadn't realised, of course, the bus driver has to be included, otherwise there'd be 12 people on the bus. So the bus driver is also one of the people mentioned, which is good.
Yeah. So, Kate, this was where we were going to maybe invite our audience to participate with us if they want to. What did we have in mind?
Well, I guess that in my poem about my home, it was saying about some interesting things, or some obvious and very general things that home might know about you, but also some very particular things. And we were going to ask if anyone would like to offer a line about anything particular that their home knows about them. I was going to say that perhaps nobody else knows, but that's maybe quite a big a big admission. But is there something particular about? I suppose it's the idea for the poem came from thinking about how, however intimately we know somebody, a partner or a sibling or anyone in our family or who we live with. That our home knows something about us beyond even that. So yes, if there was anything you could share, saying about what your home knows about you.
So, I mean, I have to admit that I prepped this, but I thought I'd start the ball rolling. So I had done this after we talked the other day, and I'm going to put it in the chat so people don't feel that they're alone. It hasn't formatted. It was actually nicely formatted as two separate verses there, as you can see on my note.
Wow! Oh my goodness!
But, there we are. I've put it in the chat. If anybody else wants to have a go, we would love to hear from you. I'm going to open the Q&A. So you'll see that appear. If you've got any questions for Kate, do feel that you can add them and we'll take them from that as we go through. So before we move on to curriculum links, I'm going to give people time, obviously, to post in the chat here about their home, and we'll share some of those. You wanted to give some thanks, didn't you? Maybe this is a good opportunity to do that.
Yes, I really did. Well, I want to say thank you, Nikki, for hosting this conversation. It's really wonderful. But I wanted to say a huge thanks to Eilidh for her beautiful illustrations and what a joy it was to work with her. I also want to say a huge thank you to everybody at Otterbury Books. Janetta, I think for everything that Janetta does for children's poetry, it's an amazing force for good. And I think I'm not alone as a poet to say thank you to Janetta for everything and for all her wisdom in putting the book together. To Ari, the designer, for her amazing input, and also for Tatty for all her help in spreading the word about the book. And I want to say thanks to my wonderful agent, Catherine Ross, of Fraser Ross Associates, who also sent me an amazing box of chocolate dinosaurs today, which I immediately ate all of them.
Could you just share them around with us all?
Yeah, I just opened them and then consumed them. But they were delicious and it was a very nice celebration. But yes, thank you, Catherine, for that and for many, many other things as well. And then I wanted to say a thank you to my lovely extended family and my friends, and I guess especially to Hamish, my son. I feel like he's in a way that lots of the book, in a sense, is a sort of it feels like it really captures a period in time of childhood, perhaps, in terms of my experience of watching somebody grow up. So yes, I should say thanks to him, and he doesn't mind about any of the ideas of his that I borrowed. I should clarify for any future legal case. And then I just want to say lastly, thank you so much to all the teachers and the children who I've shared poems with. I mean, I have had sheafs of paper and drafts that I've been sort of going around with when I do schools visits, and it's been so helpful to try poems out. Actually, that wasn't the case when I sort of first started writing poems for children. I didn't have that kind of work happening, but actually, it's been enormously helpful to check things out, basically. And yes, and I'm so grateful to all of the different people who've responded to poems over these however long it's been, a couple of years, something like that.
Wonderful. I can tell you that we have got some things coming through about
Amazing.
poems now, so I will share those with you. So this is from Sophie, and she says, Bethan says, my home knows when I drop my spoon. Laura says, my home knows that my sofa is a castle, bike ramp, den 80% of the time. Sophie, my home knows when I don't brush my teeth for 2 minutes. Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And Joshua this is from Andy. Joshua says, my home knows when I do my magic tricks. Isaac says, my home knows when I pick my nose and have a scratch. Age 6. And Atty says, my home knows all those quiet times when I have a nice little chat with myself. I bet lots of people talk to themselves inside their own homes.
Yes. Actually, I did a lot of sort of performing cookery shows when younger, and sometimes when older, while cooking. I'd forgotten about that.
Well, we've got another section. We're going to hear some books that link to the curriculum. So hopefully everybody's found the Q&A. So if you have a question, do put it in the Q&A, not the chat. I'll take the questions from the Q&A. Okay, over to you, Kate.
Oh yes, actually, yes. I'm just looking at it. I might read a couple of poems here, or is that? I don't think that's goes beyond. Well, I was just going to read one. Anyway, we'll see. But I was going to say yes. That I really had in mind the kind of curriculum links that are so helpful. I think I've been struck with other things that I've worked on. What a useful thing it is when a poem connects to something that's being taught. So if it's helpful to know, there's a poem about the Great Fire of London, a poem about a superhero, some things about kind of the under the sea topic, about emotions, the weather, dinosaurs, vehicles, and transport. So I thought I could read start by some mini beast riddles. They were really fun to work on, and really nice to share, it turns out, with classes, so or with any child. So they're a set of riddles. Each one is a different mini beast, and initially you can guess the mini beast, but it feels like it's been quite a nice invitation to then come up with one's own riddle about a different kind of creature. Okay, so here are the 5 mini beast riddles. Number 1. Pink wriggler, thick as a finger, soil breather, mud muncher, earth scruncher. I realise there are some younger people here, so they might want to guess. And the answer is worm. And here's the second one. Ground slurper, house heaver, trail lever, foot slimer, slow timer. And that is a snail. Here's the next one. Happy to wait. 4 + 4 = 8. Silk spinner, fly for dinner. Which is a spider. This is slightly trickier. Tiny toe tickler, egg layer, team player, root creeper, hill heaper. Quite often I read this out and then someone says, "It's a chicken!" Which is a really valid answer, but actually it's not what I intended. It's an ant. But I love that sometimes it's really spectacular, or like it's a steam train. And the last one is often hairy, sometimes scary, egg hatcher, leaf attacher, butterfly beginner, which is a caterpillar. Yes, so they've felt like a nice thing to share a lot in classrooms, and it seems like it's a kind of fun game, and that it's these kind of often these sort of 2-word descriptions, which you could see as kennings, that kind of Old English construction, can be a nice way into writing, or just the idea of putting together some kind of information about a creature for somebody else to guess. I suppose it feels like they're very interactive, or they're inviting interaction, which is what I like most about poems. That they leave a bit of space for the person listening to the poem or reading the poem.
Goes well with the question that we've just had in. I'll put it on the screen, and you can read that there. Can you read that, Kate?
I can, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Performance, yes. Can I say a bit more about this? Yeah, so I really like including something like a performance direction. I mean, I suppose I don't write the poems thinking that they're going to be read by a performer, and I hope that none of them need that. That's not what I would intend. But at the same time, I feel like it could be quite fun including a direction. So there's a poem about colds, which says if you like, you can read it with your nose pinched. There's a poem I'll read a bit later that has a kind of speed marking. And I think I was just struck. I think one of the first children's poems I ever wrote was called Comet, which was all about a comet moving fast, and it had the instruction to be read quickly and in as few breaths as you can manage. And I was sort of just amazed by how much pleasure that seemed to bring children to kind of try things out for themselves. So I think like including a performance direction or making something in the poem kind of, I don't know, juicy in the mouth to say, feeling like a real invitation, particularly for children to learn a poem and to speak a poem, just feels like a really important part of poetry for it to be sounded, I guess. I mean, I really love poetry on the page, and I think there's also a kind of quiet that poems invite that's really important. But I guess particularly for younger children, sharing poems in a way that feel like they're enjoyable to perform for an adult and perhaps for a child later feels like a really helpful part of it all.
Well, we're going to give you a chance to give your voice a rest for a minute. We have said how wonderfully illustrated this is by Eilidh Muldoon. And although Eilidh couldn't be with us this evening, she really wanted to be. She created a little video for us about the illustrations. So we're going to see that next. And then after that, we'll come back for the second half and have some more poems. So let's have a look.
Hello, I'm Eilidh Muldoon, the illustrator who was lucky enough to be invited to illustrate A Dinosaur at the Bus Stop. I'm very sorry not to be able to join you in person this evening. It would have been lovely to chat to Kate about the book and have a big conversation about it, but I'm sure it'll be a wonderful event full of insight and fun, and hopefully this wee recording can communicate how I feel about the book and inform you a bit about my experience of illustrating it. So first of all, I wanted to say how truly wonderful this collection is. The diversity of the poems is what continues to strike me when I pick up the book, which, by the way, is still an absolute thrill. I was so excited to get my copy. The book is at times silly and hilarious, with poems like The Monster Jamboree, and we've got poems about farts. And at other times it's fun and energetic, so I'm thinking about Washing Machine Jive and A Very Serious and Important Dance. Then interspersed between these poems are ones that address loneliness and sadness, like Sad Song or The Wind is in a Big Bad Mood. So it was an honour and a lot of pressure to illustrate this book, but luckily it was also extremely fun. I had a great team to work with. Before I go any further, I'd like to give a big shout out and thank you to the wonderful designer Ari, who brought together our words and images into such a stunning package. And in my line of work, I illustrate all sorts of things: colouring books, patterns, packaging, and of course books. Illustrating books is my favourite. I love the way the images can sit alongside words and work with them to tell a story. And I illustrate all sorts of books for a variety of ages. It's really fun to adapt to working with a different target audience and different page formats. I enjoy the variety, and each format has its appeal, but there's something about poems and also about short stories where only one image is required per story or poem that I find really exciting. It's a big fun challenge to come up with a story in just one image. It forces you to think about the way that the story or poem makes you feel, and how you can create a composition that includes lots of elements in one image and, more vitally, leaves out elements. It's probably harder to work out what to leave out than what to include. An illustration can obviously be enjoyed by people of all ages, but it has an especially important role for younger readers, many of whom may still be learning to read. Many maybe find reading words on paper quite tricky. And as the illustrator, I wanted to draw them into the world that Kate is creating and make sure that they understand the mood and the message of the poem. So illustration's about creating images not only to sit alongside text, but to enhance it and to add things to the story. So not just to repeat what's written. I think it was Judith Carr that said, never say the same thing twice, and that's an ethos I keep in my head whenever I'm given the challenge of illustrating texts. So I'll talk a little bit about my process, and working on this book was very much a collaboration. So I was given the text, and delightfully I was given complete, total freedom to come up with the rough sketches. I think that's a really important way of working, actually. That impulsive immediate response of an illustrator to a text can sometimes produce quite fun and unexpected results. And if a tightly briefed kind of project is presented from the get-go with lists of things to include and what not to include, that step's totally removed and the illustrator's voice is kind of lost ever so slightly. Having said that, after creating the roughs, I really needed that collaboration. So I then had feedback from Janetta, Kate and Ari, and this was absolutely vital. They brought their own ideas, suggestions, they pointed out things that I might not have noticed, and this all fed into the process, into my development stages, and hugely enhanced the final outcomes. So I wanted to show you some of my rough sketches, and I'm going to say they're very, very rough. I was looking through and finding a few here. I don't know if you can quite see them. These are very light, rough sketches for the splendid song of the sloth, the dinosaur, the sloth, the rhino, the hippo, etc. All of these animals here. And of course these were just initial first ones that then resulted in the end poem. I can find it in here somewhere. With all of these animals that actually apparently sing at a frequency that human ear cannot hear. So it was very, very clever of Kate sort of in this poem, and some of the feedback that I was given was to leave this page blank, which I think works very well and even just enhances the little point down at the bottom there. So I've got a few rough sketches that then became slightly more worked up ones. This is my sketchbook here, A Dinosaur at the Bus Stop, with some of the work for Sky music in there. And it's also full of lots of textures and mark making here. So I like to work this way. I always draw everything by hand, and just a mixture of line drawing and also some handmade textures, lots of scribbles, lots of mark making, which all get scanned in. And the reason for this is that I've always preferred this to digital drawing. I've yet to make a line drawn digitally that I think has quite the same quality as one drawn by hand. So I'd scan everything in. For example, here we go. This is from Me in the Dark and the Wardrobe Door. So I wanted quite early on, I knew I wanted these kind of dark ghost-like creatures to kind of come into the lighter area of the child in the middle. So all this is scanned in, and I then worked on creating the kind of final images. And because all the images were in black and white, I didn't have to think about using colour, there's pros and cons, but I didn't have to work with colour on the interiors, but tone and shading became really important. So I had to work out how to make some of the image sit back while other pieces kind of popped forward. There we go, I can find it. Me in the Dark and the Wardrobe Door. So I really wanted to make sure that the girl kind of popped without being too bright and too light, and these dark ghost-like figures were kind of dark without being too solid. I wanted to keep that transparency there. So there was challenges in that in itself. I also wanted to show you this one here. These were initial sketches that I did for a very serious and important dance. So I actually had the child illustrated, here we go, dancing all the different poses. But what we decided in the end was to remove the child altogether. So if you bear with me while I find the poem in the book, you can tell that I illustrated all of these in a different order to how they appeared in the book. I jumped at them in a different order because I still can't get my head around the order of them. But what I think was wonderful here was the feedback that I received, because actually, I can't remember which one of them, Ari, Kate or Janetta, suggested that we remove the child all together and just have the squid. It's only referred to in one line, but it is one of those perfect examples of where you think about what is left out rather than what to include, and I think it works really, really well. So I could show you all these over and over again. There's another example of that here with How to Bob Like a Robin. I had a child included there as well, but actually the final poem just includes the robin, which I think also works really well and gives the text room to breathe. So an impulse of mine is quite often to fill the pages with loads of imagery, but actually leaving some space for the text to breathe is a really nice way to approach things. So I also wanted to quickly chat about the cover. So the cover did involve colour, obviously, and again, feedback was really important here. One of the early versions was a dark purple with lighter writing, but this collaborative process resulted in a much sunnier, brighter, lively yellow cover, which I think suits the tone of the book a lot better. Finally, I had an inkling that one of the questions, if we were having a conversation tonight, might be, what is my favourite poem in the collection? And this is really tricky, but I'm incredibly fond of In the Quiet of the Trees. I absolutely love the concept of forest bathing, and I think Kate's captured it beautifully in this poem. It's lyrical, it's soothing, it's calming, and I wanted to create an illustration that communicated the serenity and bliss of the experience and the flow of the words. So hopefully I've managed that, and that kind of image came to me quite early on as well. I'm also a big fan of the Monster Jamboree, mainly because I don't often draw monsters, and it pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I came up with all these different monster characters that were really great big fun to illustrate as well. Lots of ideas for future projects came from that, which is always a bonus when you're doing any kind of project. So I've rambled on for quite a while. Thank you for listening to me. And again, I'm sorry not to be there in person. And I'll let you get back to your evening. So I just wanted to say thank you again to Kate and to the Otterbury team for trusting me with the task of illustrating this book. Thanks.
Oh, Nikki, I think you might be muted again.
I keep doing that so we don't get feedback and then forget to unmute myself. I was nodding at her, wanting to ask questions all the time. It felt as though she was right there with us, not on the film. Was there, maybe, I could ask you the question, Kate, because she answered the question as to which poems she really appreciated. Really tricky question, I know, for you to answer, but were there any particular illustrations that you really appreciated?
Oh, it's really interesting. I just got it ready to show because actually I think if it's very hard to say which one, but actually I think the illustration for the poem that Eilidh was talking about, In the Quiet of the Trees, I just think is really I can't align it in the right way. Really beautiful. Such a sort of kind of transforms the image of those trees, and plants growing into something particularly kind of enchanting, and it's so delicate and gentle. I think it's a really beautiful illustration.
Well, time is moving so quickly, and that leads us quite nicely. We have got quite a few questions coming in as well, which I want to get to, but we're going to have a section on movement, and then we've got some poems about music as well to pick up, and then I'll go to some audience questions after that. Wow, so fantastic. Let me hand straight over to you for the next set of poems.
So I really enjoyed the idea of thinking a lot about movement, and particularly, I guess, in with groups of children, how fun it is to have poems that kind of inspire movement in different ways. So I'll read a few of those. So here is one called "How to Bob Like a Robin," and it comes with the instruction, which is "Please do try this at home." And essentially, it's just a series of instructions. So, hop to the right, light as a feather. Hop to the left. On the spot, hop, 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 nod, 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 blink, then think hard about worms. Jiggle tail feathers, quick, wiggle foot, tip head one way, tip head other way, stay still. Look up to the sky, open your wings, and fly. It always feels really nice to see children suddenly moving a little bit like a robin. And then there's another poem. It's not a train, but it's about a train, but it isn't itself a train, called "Ready, Steady, Steam Train." And this poem has another instruction, which it says, "Here is a poem to start off reading as slowly as possible, then gradually get faster and faster as the train gets going." So I'll try and follow my instruction. Ready, steady, steam train, and this can be quite fun to encourage some movement to go along it, but also just listening to the idea of something getting quicker. Here is the station, and here is the train, polished and waiting to travel again. The coal has been shoveled, the fire is now lit, the flames start to crackle and spatter and spit. The water is boiling, the steam starts to push, and off goes the train with a squeal and a whoosh, and the engine goes hiss and the carriages sway, and faster the train moves away with a clickety, 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 clack, past people, past houses. It zooms down the track with a chuckety, 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 chew, and into a tunnel it goes, toodaloo. So that's always really fun to do with groups of children. And then this is the the very serious and important dance that Eilidh was talking about as well, which is another series of instructions for movement. And I really, really enjoyed working on this one. I sort of had a sense like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do a kind of absurd collection of fun different kinds of movement? But I suppose an interesting thing about poems that you can often, the vocabulary in some places is quite... just in the odd place, it's a word that you wouldn't perhaps necessarily include in a collection for this age. But I've noticed that children absolutely are sort of swept along by the poem. So it's I think it's just always an interesting thing that poems often give a bit of leeway to kind of expand with language, because you're carried by the sense in other ways. Anyway, please do join in at home. A very serious and important dance. Jump up in the air like you're a startled kangaroo. Shake a foot around like there's a stone inside your shoe. Crouch down to the ground and lay a dinosaur egg. Squirm as if a baby squirrel's climbing up your trouser leg. Wobble, wobble, wobble like a human bowl of jelly. Play the drums like mad with just your hands and just your belly. Puff out both your cheeks like you're a hamster eating toast. Blink 3 times in shock, as if you think you've seen a ghost. Swirl your arms around you like a squid amid the ocean. Stamp, stamp, stamp your feet to make a thundery commotion. And now the dance is done. Top work, 3 cheers, thumbs up, kapow. The only thing that's left for you to do is take a bow. And so I've enjoyed doing this with some in sort of whole schools, and finding that year 5 and 6 will kind of surprisingly join in with unexpected gusto. I think probably because younger children are doing it too, and so somehow it becomes allowed to do something super silly.
You do find that if you are doing whole school things, older children will get involved. Definitely. As you know, I love poems about trains, and it's interesting how that rhythm of the train has inspired so many poets. I mean, there's the Night Mail and
Of course.
Robert Louis Stevenson, faster than witches, faster than fairies? Can't remember exactly the line, but View from a Railway Carriage is the poem. And I was just going to indulge myself a little bit because I know we've got some teachers in the audience. And one of the things that I used to do was to create train menus, which gave that idea of working with beats and moving around a space. So we might start getting faster and faster with coffee, coffee, coffee. The children would suggest, that the items on the menu: ham and eggs, ham and eggs, ham and eggs, ham and eggs, cheese and biscuits, cheese and biscuits, and the train would get faster and faster. Then you could have melon and grapes as it's going clickety click. So any ideas what we should say as we go through the tunnel and we pull the whistle?
Oh, something with an ooh sound. Something stew or
Stew, that would be great. Sometimes we had soup.
yes, stewed rhubarb. No, that's just terrible. I'm not very good at speaking.
Do you want it? That is perfect. Stew. Yeah. I'm going to go to some audience questions and then we'll come back for the final two poems, which are about music. So let's have a look. Vicky's got a question for us here.
Oh, do I perform as part of the writing process? I don't know if I do that much, actually. I guess I sort of, I don't know, I suppose I mumble to myself, but I don't, no, I don't often really read them out, that's probably just really bad practice, and it'd be better if I did. So I think I would always encourage children to read out while they're working. No, I don't. I guess I suppose as I often have quite a sense of how I might perform the poem, but I don't actually necessarily do it, I don't think. Yes, but I think I can, I suppose from music training, you hear quite a lot in your head. And I usually write in quite sort of public places. So maybe that's why I've learnt to restrain too much performance. But I wouldn't recommend it that you don't perform your poems as you're working on them. I think it's definitely better to do that. I think I just forget to.
Here's a question from Laura.
Oh, were there any poems that you would have liked to have included in this book, but for some reason didn't quite make it in? Oh yeah, there was a poem actually. It was about someone snoring in a house, and it just I suddenly thought, oh, I don't think it's very. Actually, I think Janetta also said, oh, it's not very kind, and I thought, yeah, no, it isn't actually. It was funny, but not in the way that I like things to be funny actually. So I was pleased that didn't go in. I think it was a good move, and but actually I tend not to have loads and loads of drafts that I don't do anything with children's poetry. I think I write quite concisely to the thing that I'm working on. So I guess I probably have quite a lot of spare ideas that I never turned into poems. But once I've sort of really feel like once the idea feels like it's ready to sort of germinate, then I almost always kind of keep going at it until it feels like it's ready to go in.
Interesting. I can't imagine you writing an unkind poem.
I don't think it's dramatically unkind. I think it was funny though. Actually, I remember Catherine, my agent, saying I think in the first few poems that I sort of put together, there were a lot about sleep, and I think at that point I just had my second child and was really sleep deprived, and so there were lots of everything had a slight tinge of whether someone was sleeping or dreaming or snoring, and yes, and so you have to. I think at that point you need to remove your own context a little bit from things. So that was a good note.
A few more questions.
Oh, how I chose the title of the collection. Actually, it's funny. So this poem came out of a conversation with a really lovely parent, a friend. This idea of a dinosaur at the bus stop. We were just talking with our children about the idea of in Oxfordshire, particularly, was a real site of dinosaur. Loads and loads of dinosaur bones have been found here, and I think we were just all kind of talking about this idea of. I don't know how extraordinary it would be if we were in some kind of parallel world where the dinosaurs had somehow continued. I know evolutionarily that's obviously a catastrophic error of possibility, but anyway, it was an interesting idea, and it's funny. I wrote I sort of was like, oh, that feels like a title, which actually is quite rare. I often really struggle to find titles for things, but I almost had the idea of like, oh, it feels like a title, and it has something. I feel like it's somehow a little bit inviting and a bit mysterious and a little bit everyday with the bus stop, which also felt really important to state, because I think a lot of the book is actually about everyday normal things, but perhaps thinking about them in a slightly different light or celebrating them in a slightly different way. So yes, but I did just say also I checked with all the people who are in that conversation that they didn't mind me turning it into a poem about dinosaurs at the bus stop.
So I think we've got time for, we've got a child question. So I'm going to go to that one next, and then one more question after that before I invite you to read the last two poems.
Oh, that's a great question. What's my favourite place to write? Well, it's a cafe around the corner from me that doesn't even really have tables. It's like it's just a very, and it's often there's a really big coffee bean grinder that makes an extraordinarily loud noise. But for some reason, it's just like a lucky spot for me. And so I only ever go there when I've sort of got a poem ready to write, and or pretty much. And yes, it's funny. It's in lots of ways unideal, but I think that's sort of often what people find themselves. So it's noisy and it's not particularly comfortable, and yet it's that's where I'm most happy to write poems.
Last question.
Oh, that's a good one. I think my favourite type of poem is one that has a kind of slightly weird format. So like the poem about naming toes. So there's a poem that it's just a kind of list, a numbered list of it's called The Names I Give My Toes. And I think I feel like when something could almost be questioned whether it's a poem, then I find the deepest satisfaction in that. And it's funny because I think I do a lot of that for writing for older children. And when I first started, the sort of first poems I wrote for the collection were perhaps a little more what might be expected, the style of poem perhaps. And then I thought, oh no, I kind of want this book to have a bit of that in as well, some strange lists and some kind of prosy things and some poems with instructions and things like that. So I think poems that don't feel exactly like poems. I think
Just quickly found the
Oh yeah.
illustration for you so that people could see that. So, Kate, our last section's about music, which of course links very much to the movement section that we've just had. And you are a professional musician by training.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I up to a point, and then I stopped. But yes, yeah, I did.
More than most of us, let's say.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the relationship between music and poetry, and then perhaps I'll ask you to read the last two poems, and we'll end the session on that final reading. So before we go there, I want to thank Janetta and Otterbury Books and Tatty and everybody who works on the Otterbury team for helping to set this event up. I want to thank the audience for joining us this evening and for their fantastic questions and for joining in with our invitation to participate. And of course, I want to thank you more than anybody for writing this book and Eilidh for illustrating it. It's been such a pleasure talking with you this evening. Can you just take us out by telling us a little bit about music and poetry and reading these last two poems?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I guess music is in a way, it's sort of the starting point for me when I write poems. Almost always, I feel like I've got half my brain thinking absolutely about the sound of words, and that often the sounds are leading the way, and that the sense of the poem kind of follows because the words have some kind of interesting half rhyme, or there's something kind of pleasing about them. And that I think that's the really interesting thing about poems, that they kind of blend this sound and this idea of sense that perhaps more so than any other sort of writing. And and I suppose I feel very lucky that all that music training, I think in a way, I hope it's given me a certain ear for rhythm and rhyme and other kinds of sounds. And I just find it pleasurable. It's strange. Somehow it doesn't seem to be, I don't tire of it. I just find something just intrinsically deeply satisfying about lining up some words that have some interesting sonic connection and that isn't too obvious, but that is that sort of lands. So yes, and so in a way, what the first poem I'm going to read, I suppose, is kind of about that. So it's sort of about the sounds themselves. It's called Pick a Sound, Any Sound. But I suppose in the exploring the idea of different sounds that are in the world, it's exploring the sounds of the words that describe them as well. So this is Pick a Sound, Any Sound. What's your favourite noise? What's the best sound around? What would you choose from all the world's whoops and fizzes and gurgles and booms? A space rocket zoom or popping balloons? Tiger sneezes or seaside breezes? A brilliant burp, the honk of a goose, or the slurp of your straw with one last sip of juice? It could be the crunch of a cornflake mid-munch. Or are yours the sort of ears to cheer the soft as silk sounds? The swoosh of a cloud, the shush of a secret, the creak of trees, hum of bees, swish of a grasshopper rattling its knees, or even the hush that hangs when everything stops. Listen. So what do you think? What's the best sound around? A raindrop's plink? An ocean's roars? A hippo's snores? The choice, of course, is yours. And then I'll read one more. In a way, yes, it's funny thinking about these poems as being the music-y poems, because I hope almost all the poems feel sort of like music-y poems, but yes, here's a deliberate music-y one. So this is the last poem in the book, and it's called Sky Music. And I guess if we're going to finish, thank you very much, so much for coming. It's been really nice. So this is Sky Music. The sky is filled with music. The sun wakes up to pluck a gold guitar. The clouds huff and puff, they toot on flutes. An aeroplane swoops by and tap, tap, taps the drum of the sky. Then comes night. The stars ring tiny bells of light. Ting-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. The moon sings his soft, sweet tune. Sleep tight, sleep tight, sleep tight. And the sky begins to snore.